You've heard of crucifixions and gladiator arenas, but few people today know about one of the most disturbing execution rituals in Roman history. A punishment so horrifying, so bizarre, and so methodically cruel that even hardened criminals feared it. It was called parricide, the punishment of the sack, and it was reserved for one crime only: parricide, the murder of one's own parent. To ancient Romans, this wasn't just murder. It was an abomination, an act that violated the sacred foundations of family and Roman order. Killing your father or mother meant you weren't just a criminal, you were unnatural. And so, your punishment had to be unnatural, too. The execution wasn't swift. It wasn't dignified. It was a ritual humiliation, a living nightmare crafted down to the last detail. First, the accused would be publicly stripped and paraded through the city, not as a warning to others, but as a display of shame. To be convicted of parricide was to lose your place in society, in your lineage, in humanity itself. You were no longer a person. You were a monster, and you were about to die like one. The punishment began with a flogging. The condemned would be beaten severely, sometimes until unconscious, but never to death. The purpose wasn't pain, it was preparation. Then came the sack. It wasn't just any sack. This was a large, thick leather bag, carefully stitched and sealed to make escape impossible. But it wasn't what the sack was made of that terrified people. It was what went inside. Before being tied shut, animals were placed into the sack along with the prisoner: a dog, representing madness; a rooster, representing aggression; a monkey, representing chaos and mockery; and finally, a snake, the symbol of betrayal and doom. All alive, all frightened, all trapped with you. No food, no air, no light, just you and them. The animals weren't chosen at random. The Romans believed symbolism was essential to justice. Each creature reflected an aspect of the crime of parricide. The dog howled like a disloyal son. The monkey mocked nature. The rooster never stopped crowing, as a symbol of unrelenting judgment. And the snake was your fate, slithering around your limbs in the darkness, tightening as you gasped for air. The sack, once sealed, became a prison of screams. Inside, the animals would panic. They would scratch, peck, bite, hiss, claw. And the human in the middle would become their target. Imagine the horror: tied, blind, suffocating, feeling hot fur and feathers and scales scrape across your face, feeling a monkey shriek in your ear, feeling claws tear into your legs, feeling a cold serpent coil around your chest, sinking its fangs into your skin, and knowing that no one outside could hear your screams. Once the sack was sealed, it was loaded onto a cart and transported to a river, most famously the Tiber in Rome. By then, the man inside might already be half dead from bites or terror. But the worst part hadn't even started yet. The executioners would roll the sack into the water, letting it sink slowly. There was no oxygen, no light, no help. As the sack filled with water, the leather tightened. The animals panicked. In those final moments, the condemned drowned, or was torn apart, or both. It was slow, it was vile, and it was deliberate. The Romans wanted it that way. This wasn't about justice. It was about obliteration. Parricide wasn't a crime to be punished. It was a stain to be erased. The sack was designed not just to kill the body, but to humiliate the soul. The death was hidden. The body was unrecoverable. There was no grave, no tombstone, nothing left, not even bones. Your name would be spoken only in disgust. Roman historians, including Cicero and Livy, wrote about this punishment with both horror and fascination. It wasn't common, but when it happened, the entire empire watched. It was Rome at its darkest, a legal system blending punishment with theater, cruelty with symbolism. One of the most famous cases involved a Roman man named Publius Malleolus, who killed his mother in a rage over inheritance. He tried to lie, to cover it up, but once convicted, there was no appeal. He was sewn into the sack, animals and all, and hurled into the river. Another version of the punishment: later in the Roman Empire, replaced some animals depending on availability. Sometimes a viper was used instead of a snake in provinces without monkeys. Other small creatures were substituted, but the essence was the same. The prisoner would die violently and alone, shredded and bitten, gasping in the dark. The punishment of the sack eventually faded as the empire declined. The Byzantine Empire later revived it in altered forms, but it never regained the same symbolic terror. Still, echoes of penal cully survive today, not in practice, but in how we view certain crimes. Modern law doesn't use sacks, snakes, or dogs, but the concept of inhumanity deserves inhuman punishment hasn't entirely disappeared. You might wonder, was this really necessary? Couldn't they just execute the parricide with a sword, a hanging, a poison cup? Of course they could, but to Rome, that wasn't enough. Killing your parent wasn't just a private betrayal. It was a rupture in the natural order. And Rome, obsessed with order and control, needed a punishment that restored balance in the most extreme way possible. So they created a living tomb, a coffin filled with chaos, animal fury, and symbolic revenge. And they drowned the sinner in it. Penal cully wasn't just an execution. It was a purge. As centuries passed, Roman lawmakers refined the process, not out of mercy, but out of organization. Some versions of the law required that the condemned wear wooden clogs and a wolf's skin mask. Before being led to execution, the shoes were meant to deny him contact with the sacred earth. The mask, to remove his identity. He wasn't a Roman anymore. He wasn't even a man. He was a blasphemer against the natural order. There are recorded instances where even the audience turned away. Roman citizens, used to the brutality of the Colosseum, would lower their eyes when the sack was hauled toward the river, not because they pitied the criminal, but because the punishment was disturbing even to them. It wasn't entertainment. It was an omen. Legal documents from the reign of Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius mention how parricide trials carried the greatest emotional weight. The accused were often treated not just as murderers, but as spiritual outcasts. Roman priests would avoid walking the same streets. Some households would perform cleansing rituals if a parricide had occurred nearby, as if the crime had infected the soil, even in Roman satire, which mocked nearly every element of life. In politics, penal cully was rarely joked about. It was sacred horror, too terrifying to become. Humor. Over time, Christian scholars began to write about the punishment. The early church, already obsessed with moral decay, saw penal cully as symbolic, a sinner cast into a hellish prison with unclean beasts. Later interpretations painted the sack as a metaphor for spiritual death, isolation, punishment, damnation. But make no mistake, for the Romans, it was literal. In the later years of the empire, some governors and rulers modified the ritual, not to lessen the pain, but to increase spectacle. One particularly cruel variation replaced the snake with a viper, and let the sack sit under the hot sun before tossing it into the river to cook the prisoner from within. Another Roman province reportedly added broken glass or nails to the sack, as if the claws and fangs weren't enough. There was also a twisted logic to the selection of animals. The Romans didn't just want pain. They wanted a kind of moral theater. Each beast was chosen to represent a trait they believed the parricide had violated. The dog, loyal by nature, attacked the disloyal. The monkey, foolish and wild, punished the loss of discipline. The rooster, who cries out every dawn, reminded all of judgment that comes with the rising sun. And the snake was death. Imagine being tied up inside such a sack. You can't move. You can barely breathe. You're already bleeding from bites. Your body is pressed between fur, feathers, and scales. And you don't know which direction is up anymore. And then, with a final push, you're rolled into the river. The sack tightens. You feel the pressure of water surrounding you. The air is gone. The weight of the snake's body crushes your chest. The rooster panics and claws your face. The monkey screeches and bites your shoulder. You are now a prisoner of chaos, and the Roman state watches it all in silence. One reason why this punishment lingers in the modern imagination is because it feels so wildly unhuman, even by ancient standards. It's extreme. And yet, this was the official legal method for one specific crime, passed by the Senate, written into Roman law, enforced by real executioners. We often imagine the Roman Empire as a place of advancement, of aqueducts, libraries, marble cities, and it was. But it was also a place where mercy was never guaranteed, where justice could be a public drowning inside a sack of angry animals. And it wasn't just the execution that shocked people, it was the finality. After the sack sank, the body was never recovered. There was no funeral, no grave. Your family couldn't mourn you. You were erased. It was the legal version of eternal damnation. Some historians believe this was part of the point. The Romans weren't just punishing the criminal. They were punishing the memory. Parricide was seen as a rot within the household, and the only way to stop a rot was to burn it out completely, or in this case to drown it beneath the weight of fierce symbolism and animals clawing in the dark. Today, Pinnacully is studied by legal historians, theologians, and anthropologists, not just for its cruelty, but for what it reveals about Rome. That beneath the marble columns and grand forums was a deep obsession with order, blood, and ritual punishment. It tells us something even darker, that humans, when terrified of chaos, often turn to barbarism to restore control. That when a society is shaken by a crime as primal as killing a parent, it may answer with a punishment designed to erase the criminal from memory altogether. No blood spilled on the ground, no cries that offend the gods above, only a silent sack for frightened animals and a drowning that no one was allowed to stop. Pinnacully is gone from modern law books, but its echo remains in the way we treat crimes of betrayal, in how we fear unnatural acts, and in the stories we pass down about justice that screams from a river's depth. This was real. This was Roman justice, and now you've heard it. Only here, in Torture's Room, where history's darkest punishments return to life.